There is a truth about human nature that most people sense, but very few ever learn how to see clearly. And once you truly see it, something inside you changes permanently. Carl Jung discovered that you can recognize a person's real character, not the version they present, not the version they believe themselves to be, but who they actually are beneath all of it, by observing just two specific patterns, two psychological signals that cannot be rehearsed, cannot be fully controlled, and cannot be hidden for long. Not their words. Words are the easiest thing to manipulate. Anyone can sound kind, intelligent, self-aware, or emotionally mature when they have time to think about what they're saying, not their achievements. Success often reflects timing, environment, and opportunity just as much as it reflects character. Not even their behavior when they know they are being watched. Because that is exactly when most people are performing their most refined version of themselves. No. What reveals someone is something much quieter, something automatic, something they are not aware they are showing. Jung found that there are two psychological signatures that consistently expose what lies beneath the persona, the social mask every human being constructs in order to function in the world. And the unsettling part is this: people reveal these signatures constantly, in ordinary conversations, in casual reactions, in small, seemingly insignificant moments that most others overlook. And they do it without realizing it. You've felt this before, that subtle moment when something doesn't quite align. You're sitting across from someone you know, a colleague, a friend, maybe even someone you love. On the surface, everything appears normal. They speak clearly. They seem composed. Their behavior fits what you would expect. And yet, something feels off. You can't explain it logically. There is no obvious contradiction, no clear evidence, but your body registers it anyway. A quiet tension, a slight resistance, a sense that what you are seeing is not the full picture, that instinct is not random. It is perception operating below conscious awareness. Jung spent decades studying exactly this phenomenon. He called the surface identity the persona, the mask that allows a person to move through society in a way that is acceptable, functional, and rewarded. And he was very clear about something important. The persona is not fake in a simple sense. It is necessary. Every person develops one, because the world does not reward raw authenticity. It rewards certain expressions of it, certain tones, certain behaviors, certain controlled versions of the self that fit within social expectations. So people adapt. They refine themselves. They shape how they are perceived. And over time, that mask becomes so practiced that even they begin to believe it represents who they are. But it doesn't. Because beneath the persona lives something else, something unfiltered, something less controlled, something that cannot be fully managed, no matter how self-aware someone becomes. And Jung discovered that no matter how carefully a person constructs their image, no matter how disciplined they are in maintaining it, no matter how intelligent or emotionally refined they appear, there are always cracks. And through those cracks, the truth comes through, not in dramatic ways, not in obvious confessions, but in patterns, subtle, repeatable, unconscious patterns. And once you understand what to observe, you will never look at people the same way again, because you will stop evaluating what they say. You will stop being influenced by how they present themselves. You will stop being misled by confidence, charm, or social intelligence. And you will begin to see something deeper, something far more accurate. But here is where this becomes uncomfortable, because these patterns do not only reveal others, they reveal you. Jung once said that the most terrifying thing a human being can encounter is the full truth of themselves, and the same mechanisms that expose others are constantly active within you as well. The same unconscious reactions, the same automatic projections, the same patterns you assume are about the world, but are actually reflections of something inside you. Most people spend their entire lives evaluating others from the surface, They look for kindness, for confidence, for success, for likability, for emotional expression, and they assume these things reflect character. But these are performance indicators. They belong to the outer layer, the part of the personality that is shaped for visibility. The real person is not located there. The real person exists beneath it. And that is exactly where Jung directed his attention, because he understood something most people avoid. What is unconscious cannot be faked. It cannot be maintained under all conditions, and it cannot remain hidden when life begins to apply pressure. That is where truth appears. And the first of these revealing patterns, the one Jung identified as one of the most reliable indicators of a person's true nature, is something he called shadow projection, or what we can understand more clearly as shadow mapping. It is the ability to understand who someone is by observing who they judge and how they judge them, not casually, not lightly, but intensely, emotionally, disproportionately. Because when someone reacts to another person with a level of criticism that exceeds the situation, when their tone sharpens, when their body shifts, when their attention locks in with unusual intensity, they are not simply describing the other person, they are revealing themselves. Because what they are reacting to is not just what they see, it is what they recognize, but have not accepted within their own nature. And that is where everything begins. Now this is where things begin to deepen and where most people become uncomfortable. Because once you understand this first pattern, once you truly begin to observe how people judge others, you start to realize something that is impossible to ignore. What people react to is never just about what is in front of them. It is about what lives inside them. Jung called this projection, but not in the casual sense people use today, not as a vague psychological term. He described it as a precise and consistent mechanism of the psyche, a way the mind protects itself from facing what it has rejected within its own structure. Because there are parts of you that, at some point in your life, you decided were not acceptable, not safe, not allowed. Traits, impulses, desires, tendencies that did not align with the identity you were trying to build or the expectations placed on you early on. So instead of integrating them, you buried them, you pushed them out of your conscious identity. And once something is pushed out like that, it does not disappear, it relocates, it moves into what Jung called the shadow. And from there, it continues to influence you, silently, indirectly, but powerfully, and the way it expresses itself most clearly is through other people. Because what you refuse to see in yourself, you will begin to see everywhere else, and not neutrally, not calmly, but with intensity, with judgment, with emotion that feels justified, but is actually disproportionate. This is the key. Because when someone reacts to another person in a way that is stronger than the situation requires, when their tone sharpens, when their expression changes, when their attention locks in with a kind of emotional charge, you are no longer witnessing objective perception. You are witnessing projection. They are not simply describing what they see. They are reacting to something they recognize but cannot accept within themselves. And this happens constantly, in subtle ways, in ordinary conversations, in moments most people overlook. Take a simple example. Imagine someone who defines themselves as honest, grounded and authentic, someone who takes pride in being real, who believes they are not like others who perform, exaggerate, or seek attention. And then they encounter someone who is socially fluid, charismatic, expressive, someone who moves easily in conversations, who knows how to engage, how to influence, how to be seen. And suddenly, the reaction appears. They're fake. They're manipulative. They're not real. But if you observe closely, it is not calm. It is not neutral. There is tension in the voice. There is sharpness in the tone. There is something personal in the way the criticism is delivered, and that is the signal. Because what Jung would immediately recognize in that moment is not just a judgment about the other person, but a conflict inside the one who is judging, a disowned part, a rejected potential, a trait that exists but has been pushed away. Because somewhere along the way, that person decided that being expressive, charming, or socially skilled was not acceptable. Maybe it felt dishonest, maybe it felt unsafe, maybe it conflicted with how they wanted to see themselves. So instead of integrating that ability, they rejected it. And now, they attack it externally. They solve the tension internally, by condemning it externally. They do not have to admit, even to themselves, that they wish they had that same ease, that same fluidity, that same ability to move through social environments, because they have already labeled it as something negative. And once something is labeled negatively, it becomes easier to reject, but the emotional intensity reveals the truth, because if it were truly irrelevant, if it had nothing to do with them, there would be no charge, no reaction, no need to focus on it repeatedly. This is why shadow projection is so reliable, because it does not depend on conscious awareness. It operates automatically, and the stronger the reaction, the closer you are to something real. Jung made this very clear. We cannot change what we do not accept. And condemnation does not eliminate anything, it reinforces it, because every time you reject something in others with emotional force, you are reinforcing the boundary that keeps that same trait unconscious within you. You are maintaining the split, and that split is what creates tension, not just in how you see others, but in how you experience yourself. Because the shadow does not only contain what is negative, this is where most people misunderstand it. It also contains what is powerful, what is creative, what is expressive, what is alive but was never allowed to fully exist. And this is why projection is not only negative, sometimes it appears as admiration, as fascination, as placing someone on a pedestal. When someone looks at another person and says, "They're incredible, they're so confident. They have something I could never have." And again, the emotion is strong, the attention is focused, the admiration feels almost excessive. That too is projection, because they are not just seeing something external, they are recognizing something internal that they have not yet claimed. The difference is only in direction. One rejects, the other idealizes, but both point to the same place, something within that has not been integrated. And if you begin to observe this carefully, not just in others, but in yourself, everything changes, because suddenly your judgments become information, your reactions become signals, your emotional intensity becomes a map of what you have buried and what you have not yet allowed yourself to become. This is why Jung considered this one of the most powerful tools for self-awareness, because if you are willing to look honestly, every strong reaction you have toward another person is an opportunity not to analyze them, but to understand yourself. And once you begin to see that, you stop asking only, "Who are they?" And you start asking something much more important. What in me is responding to this? There is a second pattern, and this one reveals even more than the first, because while projection shows you what someone hides from themselves, this one shows you who they become when they can no longer hide. Jung understood that the persona, the mask people build to function in the world, is not something fragile on the surface. It is reinforced daily, refined, maintained, protected. But it is not permanent. It depends on control. And the moment control is disrupted, the moment something unexpected happens, the moment reality does not align with the identity someone has constructed, the mask cracks. And in that exact moment, you see the truth. Not the prepared version, not the edited version, but the unfiltered pattern that exists underneath. This is what can be called mask collapse, and it is one of the most reliable ways to understand someone's real character, because people can manage themselves when everything is going according to expectation. They can stay calm. They can be kind. They can appear patient, grounded, emotionally intelligent, but when something challenges their identity, when something threatens how they see themselves, their response is no longer controlled. It is automatic, and that automatic response is who they are. You don't need extreme situations to observe this. It happens in small moments, constantly, moments most people overlook. But if you pay attention, they reveal everything. Imagine someone who has built their identity around being composed, calm, unshaken under pressure, the kind of person others rely on because they never lose control. That is their persona. That is how they are known. Now place them in a situation where that identity is challenged. They are questioned publicly, their decision is criticized, their competence is doubted in front of others, and suddenly something shifts. Their tone tightens, their body stiffens, their responses become sharp, defensive, maybe even subtly aggressive. They interrupt. They deflect, they redirect blame, they protect themselves, and in that moment, the calm person disappears, not because it was fake, but because it was conditional, maintained under control. And once that control is disrupted, the underlying structure appears. This is what Jung meant when he said that what is unconscious directs your life. Because under pressure, there is no time to construct a response. There is no time to manage perception. There is only reaction, and reaction reveals structure. It shows what someone has not integrated, what they cannot face, what they are defending against. Because if someone cannot tolerate being wrong, they will not respond with reflection. They will respond with defense. If someone cannot tolerate vulnerability, they will not respond with openness. They will respond with control. If someone has built their identity on perfection, any challenge to that identity will feel like a threat, and they will react accordingly. This is why moments of discomfort are so revealing, because they remove the distance between who someone thinks they are and how they actually operate. And you don't need dramatic situations to see this. Watch the small disruptions. Watch what happens when things don't go their way, when they are inconvenienced, when they are ignored, when they are not validated in the way they expected, when they are made to wait, when they are not the center of attention, when their effort is not recognized. These moments matter because they are unprepared, they are not rehearsed, and in those moments the mask loosens, sometimes just for a second. A change in expression, a shift in tone, a subtle tension in the body, a reaction that appears quickly and then gets corrected. But if you are paying attention, you will see it. And once you see it, you will begin to understand something most people miss. Character is not what someone shows you when everything is comfortable. It is what emerges when comfort disappears. Because true stability is not performance, it is consistency. It is the ability to remain aligned, even when it is difficult, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it would be easier to react unconsciously. And this is where the difference becomes clear. There are people whose outer behavior matches their inner structure, and there are people whose outer behavior depends entirely on maintaining control. The first group does not change dramatically under pressure, because there is no split. What they show is what they are. The second group collapses, because what they show is a construction, and construction requires energy, maintenance, control, and the moment that control weakens, the structure cannot hold. This is why Jung emphasized integration, because without integration, the persona and the true self remain separate, and that separation creates instability, it creates tension, it creates the need to constantly manage perception. But when someone has done the inner work, when they have faced what is uncomfortable, when they have accepted both their strength and their limitation. Their responses become different, not perfect, but real. They can receive criticism without collapsing. They can acknowledge mistakes without defending. They can remain present even when challenged. Because they are not protecting an image, they are grounded in themselves, and this is something you can feel immediately. It does not require analysis. It does not require explanation. There is a consistency, a steadiness, an absence of unnecessary reaction, because nothing essential is being threatened, and this is where observation becomes powerful. Because once you begin to see these patterns, you stop being influenced by appearance. You stop being misled by performance. You stop assuming that confidence means stability or that calmness means strength. And you begin to look at something deeper, something far more reliable. How does this person respond when they are not prepared, when they are not in control, when something disrupts their identity? Because that is where the truth lives. And once you start paying attention to that, you will begin to see people clearly, not as they present themselves, but as they actually are. And at the same time, you will begin to see yourself. And this is where everything turns inward. Because at some point, if you are truly paying attention, this stops being about other people. It becomes about you, not in theory, not in abstraction, but in a way that is direct, undeniable, and impossible to avoid. Because once you learn to see these patterns, projection, reaction, mask, collapse, you begin to notice something uncomfortable. You are not outside of them, you are inside them. The same mechanisms you observe in others are operating in you, the same judgments, the same emotional intensities, the same moments where your reaction says more than your words ever could. And this is where most people stop. Because it is one thing to analyze others, it is another thing entirely to turn that same level of clarity inward. Because suddenly, the question is no longer, who are they really? It becomes, what am I doing that I have not yet seen? And that question changes everything, because now every judgment becomes information, every reaction becomes a signal, every emotional charge becomes a doorway. You begin to notice who triggers you, not casually, but specifically. You begin to ask, why does this bother me so much? Why does this person affect me more than others? Why does this reaction feel stronger than it should? And if you stay with that question, without escaping it, without justifying it, without turning it back outward, you start to see something deeper. You start to see yourself, not the version you present, not the version you believe, but the version that exists beneath your own persona, because just like everyone else, you have one. You have learned how to be seen. You have learned what is acceptable. You have shaped yourself around expectations. You have developed ways of presenting who you are in a way that works. And over time, that presentation became familiar, comfortable, even convincing. But it is not complete, because beneath it, there are parts of you that you have not fully accepted, parts you have minimized, ignored, repressed, or simply never explored. And those parts do not disappear. They remain active, influencing your reactions, shaping your perceptions, determining how you relate to others without you realizing it. This is why Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life. Because what you do not see, you cannot choose. You can only repeat. And repetition that feels like fate. It feels like patterns you cannot escape, people you keep encountering. Situations that feel familiar, even when they change, but the pattern is not outside, it is inside. And once you begin to see that, something shifts. You stop trying to control everything around you. You stop trying to fix people. You stop trying to avoid discomfort at all costs. And instead, you begin to observe. You begin to understand. You begin to choose. And that is where real change happens. not in forcing yourself to be better, but in becoming more aware, more integrated, more whole. Because wholeness does not mean perfection. It does not mean eliminating flaws. It does not mean becoming someone ideal. It means accepting that you are not only what you show, but also what you hide. Not only your strengths, but your contradictions. Not only what is easy to claim, but what is difficult to face. And when you reach that point, something important happens. You become harder to manipulate because you are no longer reacting unconsciously. You become harder to control because your emotional responses are no longer automatic. You become more grounded, more stable, more present because you are not constantly defending an image. You are simply being. And from that place, your relationship with others changes. You stop taking things personally. You stop being pulled into emotional dynamics that once affected you deeply. You stop needing to prove, to defend, to explain. And instead, you observe, you understand, you choose how to respond. That is the difference between unconscious living and conscious awareness. But there is something important to understand here, because this knowledge can be misused. It can become another form of avoidance. Another way to stay outside of yourself. You can become skilled at analyzing others, while never applying the same depth of attention inward. You can begin to label people, to categorize them, to feel superior in your understanding, while avoiding your own shadow completely. And that is the trap. Because at that point, you are not using awareness to grow. You are using it to protect yourself, to stay comfortable, to avoid what is difficult. And Jung warned about this. Because true psychological understanding is not about control. It is not about manipulation. It is not about becoming more judgmental or more detached. It is about becoming more honest, more open, more willing to see what is real, even when it challenges you. Because the real purpose of seeing clearly is not to change others. It is to understand yourself. And through that understanding, to change how you exist. Because when you stop participating in unconscious patterns, when you stop reacting automatically, when you stop being pulled into projections and emotional dynamics, you create something rare. Space for something different to emerge, space for clarity, for authenticity, for real connection. And that changes not only your life, but the environment around you. Because awareness is not isolated. It influences everything it touches, every interaction, every relationship, every decision. And slowly, without force, without effort, things begin to shift. Not because you controlled them, but because you changed. And this is the deeper meaning of everything Jung discovered. These patterns are not tools for reading others. They are mirrors. They show you where you are, what you have integrated, what you have avoided, what is still asking to be seen. And every moment you notice something is an invitation not to judge, but to understand, not to react, but to reflect, not to control, but to become aware. So now the question becomes simple, but not easy. Are you living as who you truly are, or as the version of yourself you learned to be? Take a moment, be honest, because the answer to that question will change everything.